In an era of unprecedented information access, a peculiar paradox has emerged. Truth seems to matter less than ever before. We live in a world saturated with data, yet starved for meaning. The traditional anchors of reality, spiritual connection, communal identity, and a shared understanding of the cosmos have been eroded by a relentless tide of materialism. To understand why truth no longer matters, we must look beyond the surface level of politics and economics and grapple with a much deeper, more disturbing question: who holds real power in the world, and what is the nature of the reality they have constructed for us? This inquiry is not merely academic, it is a thought experiment designed to untangle the hidden threads of history and influence. When we peel back the layers of modern civilization, we find that power is not just about money or armies. It is about ideas. Specifically, it is about the ability to define the boundaries of what is possible. The most potent form of control is not physical coercion, but the manipulation of perception. If you can convince a population that they are nothing more than biological machines in a dead, indifferent universe, you have enslaved them more effectively than any chain ever could. This essay will explore the hypothesis that the dominant worldview of our time, materialism, is not a natural evolution of human thought, but an imposed construct. We will trace the genealogy of this idea from ancient times to the present, examining how elite groups have historically used concepts like justification by faith and justification by sin to consolidate power. We will look at the dark history of secret societies, from the Sabbatean Frankists to the modern technocratic elite, and how their eschatological visions are driving current geopolitical conflicts. Ultimately, we will argue that the war we are fighting is not just for resources or territory, but for the very soul of humanity. Part 1. The materialist trap: the displacement of consciousness. For the vast majority of human history, our ancestors operated under a radically different paradigm than we do today. Whether we look at Native American traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, or ancient paganism, a common thread unites them: the belief that consciousness is primary. In these worldviews, the universe is not a random collection of inert matter, but a living, breathing entity. Human beings are not accidents of evolution, but vessels for a divine spark, active participants in the co-creation of reality. This perspective granted immense agency to the individual. If reality is a projection of consciousness, then the human imagination is a divine tool. It implies that we are not victims of circumstance, but powerful creators capable of shaping our destiny. In such societies, hierarchy and property were often less rigid, as the spiritual connection between people and the land took precedence over material accumulation. However, as societies grew more complex, a new class of elites emerged who sought to centralize power. To do so, they needed to sever the link between the individual and the divine. If people believe they are eternal souls temporarily inhabiting physical bodies, they are difficult to control. They do not fear death in the same way, and they do not bow easily to earthly authority. Therefore, the elite project for the last several millennia has been to invert this understanding, to convince humanity that matter is fundamental and consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain chemistry. The architecture of fear, the materialist worldview, is, at its core, a philosophy of despair. It teaches that the physical world is all there is. When the body dies, the self is extinguished. This creates a profound existential anxiety, a fear of death that becomes the primary lever of social control. If this life is the only chance for happiness, then the accumulation of material goods, status, and physical security becomes paramount. We see this manifested in the modern obsession with safety, the frenetic pursuit of wealth, and the widespread depression that plagues the developed world. By reducing human beings to atoms and synapses, the architects of this reality have stripped life of its transcendent meaning. We are told we are powerless, insignificant specks in a cold void. This disempowerment is not an accidental byproduct of science. It is a deliberate strategy of containment. The symbols of the 20th century, the atomic bomb, the moon landing, the space race, can be reinterpreted through this lens. While ostensibly achievements of exploration and defense, they also served a psychological function to cement the dominance of the material. The atomic bomb demonstrated that matter could be manipulated to unleash godlike destruction, placing the power of the apocalypse in the hands of the state rather than the divine. The space program, regardless of its scientific merit, reinforced the image of a vast, empty universe where life is a fragile anomaly, further isolating the human spirit. Part 2. The genealogy of control, the Reformation, and the birth of anxiety. To understand how we arrived at this point, we must look at the pivotal moments where the Western mind was reprogrammed. One such moment was the Protestant Reformation. Before Martin Luther, religious life in Europe was largely transactional and ritualistic. Salvation was mediated through the church. If you followed the rituals and paid your tithes, you were safe. It was a system of justification by works. Luther disrupted this by introducing justification by faith. He argued that rituals were empty without a genuine internal belief in God. While this seemed like a move towards spiritual authenticity, it introduced a new, terrifying variable. How do you know if your faith is real? Since the human heart is fickle and unknowable, no one could be certain of their salvation. This uncertainty birthed a deep religious anxiety. As sociologist Max Weber famously argued, this anxiety sought relief in worldly activity. Calvinists and other Protestant groups began to view material success as a sign of God's favor. If you were wealthy and disciplined, it was evidence that you were one of the elect. Thus, the pursuit of capital became a spiritual duty. The accumulation of wealth, once seen as suspect or secondary to communal feasting, became the primary metric of a virtuous life. This shift laid the foundation for the Dutch Republic, the British Empire, and ultimately the American capitalist system. The Sabbatean Frankist inversion, while the Protestants were wrestling with faith, a different and darker revolution was taking place within Judaism. In 1666, a charismatic mystic named Sabbatai Zevi declared himself the Messiah. At the time, the Jewish diaspora was reeling from the trauma of the Spanish Inquisition and the mass expulsions that followed. They were desperate for redemption. Zevi offered a radical new theology. Facing an ultimatum from the Ottoman Sultan, Zevi converted to Islam. To his followers, this should have been the ultimate betrayal, the Messiah abandoning the faith. But Zevi's theologians spun it differently. They argued that by descending into the depths of sin, apostasy, Zevi was gathering the sparks of holiness trapped in the darkness. This birthed the concept of redemption through sin. The idea was that the old laws, the Torah, were valid for an unredeemed world, but in the Messianic age, the laws were reversed. To be truly holy, one had to transgress. This antinomian philosophy turned morality on its head. A century later, Jacob Frank revitalized this movement in Eastern Europe. Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Zevi and pushed the ideology to its extreme. The Frankists engaged in ritualized taboos, sexual orgies, and the deliberate subversion of social norms. They believed that to save the world, one must descend into the abyss. Frank famously converted to Catholicism, not out of belief, but as a strategy of infiltration and camouflage. He instructed his followers to do the same, to outwardly conform to the religions and societies they lived in, while secretly adhering to their nihilistic creed. The secret history of the elite, the legacy of the Sabbatean Frankists, is not merely a footnote in religious history, it is a blueprint for covert power. The Frankists believed in infiltrating the structures of power, the church, the aristocracy, the financial systems, to bring about their eschatological vision. This strategy of crypto-identity allowed them to operate unseen, blending into the Gentile world while maintaining a distinct, secret agenda. It is theorized by some historians and researchers that these networks did not disappear but evolved. They integrated into the Freemasonic lodges, the Jesuit order, and the burgeoning financial dynasties of Europe. Their philosophy of justification by sin, the idea that the elite are above traditional morality and that transgression is a path to power, resonates with the behavior of the modern global elite. From the ritualistic abuse scandals that occasionally surface to the predatory nature of high finance, we see echoes of a worldview that despises the common law and the common man. Whether one calls them the Illuminati, the 13 families, or simply the technocratic oligarchy, the pattern is the same. A small group of initiates who believe they hold the keys to reality, operating behind a veil of secrecy, manipulating world events to serve a hidden agenda. Part 3. The geopolitics of the apocalypse. The convergence of secret societies, the world we see on the news, the conflicts between nations, the debates over policy is often theater. The real decisions are made by these submerged networks of power. But these groups are not monolithic. They are a coalition of overlapping interests. Jesuits, Freemasons, Frankists, Christian Zionists, and Mormons may have different surface-level doctrines, but they share a common fascination with the end times. Their eschatological frameworks, their beliefs about how the world ends, are surprisingly aligned. Many of these groups believe that a final cataclysmic war is necessary to usher in a new age. For Christian Zionists, it is the Battle of Armageddon that precedes the Second Coming. For certain Jewish mystics, it is the wars of Gog and Magog that precede the arrival of the Messiah. For the secular technocrats, it is the Great Reset or a singularity that allows them to transcend biological limits. The focus on Israel. This convergence of belief systems explains the peculiar and obsessive focus on Israel and the Middle East. Why is a small strip of land the pivot point for global geopolitics? It is not just about oil or strategic positioning. It is about prophecy. The Sabbatean Frankist elements within the establishment, along with their Christian Zionist allies, are arguably driving the conflict in the region. They believe that by engineering a war in which Israel fights against the world, or specifically Iran and its proxies, they can force the hand of God or trigger the conditions necessary for their new world order. Jerusalem is envisioned not just as a capital of a nation, but as the spiritual center of a future world government. This perspective reframes current events. The seemingly irrational escalation of violence, the refusal to seek diplomatic solutions, and the constant drumbeat of war in the Middle East are not policy failures. They are the successful implementation of a script written centuries ago. The suffering of the Palestinians, the Israelis, and the surrounding populations is viewed by these elites as necessary collateral damage in a cosmic drama. Part 4. The illusion of materialism science as the new religion to maintain control while pursuing these esoteric goals. The elite need a population that is blind to the spiritual dimension of reality. This is where the religion of scientism comes into play. Note the distinction. Science is a method of inquiry. Scientism is a dogmatic belief system that claims only the material is real. By promoting a strictly materialist worldview through education, media, and culture, the elite ensure that the masses remain disconnected from their own power. If people believe they are just biological accidents, they will look to external authorities, experts, politicians, scientists for salvation. They will accept the technologies of control, surveillance, digital ID, social engineering as necessary for safety and progress. The death of truth we experience today is a direct result of this. Truth, in its deepest sense, is transcendent. It is connected to the divine spark within. But in a materialist world, there is no truth with a capital T. There are only facts, data, and narratives managed by those in power. When reality is defined by those who control the media and the academy, truth becomes malleable. It becomes whatever the power structure says it is today. The NASA deception. Consider the space program again. In the traditional view, the heavens were the realm of the gods, a place of spirit and mystery. By launching rockets and claiming to land on the moon, the modern priesthood of science declared that the heavens were empty. They are just rocks and vacuum. This was a metaphysical conquest as much as a technological one. Whether one believes the moon landings were faked or real is secondary to the psychological impact. The message was clear. There is no God up there. There is only space, which we can conquer. This reinforced the idea that technology is the supreme power in the universe, replacing the divine with the human intellect, specifically the intellect of the elite scientists, the transhumanist endgame. The ultimate expression of this materialist philosophy is transhumanism. If matter is all there is, then the ultimate enemy is death. The elite, fearing the void they have preached to the masses, are obsessed with life extension and the merging of man with machine. They seek to upload their consciousness, edit their DNA, and become gods of their own making. This is the Luciferian dream, to reject the natural order and the creator, and to build a synthetic reality where they reign supreme. It is the final Tower of Babel. And just like the first one, it is built on the backs of a confused and enslaved humanity. Part 5, Reclaiming Reality, the Awakening. If this picture seems bleak, it is because we are looking at the world through the lens the elite have crafted. But the very fact that we are asking these questions suggests their control is slipping. The internet, despite its surveillance capabilities, has allowed for the rapid spread of forbidden knowledge. People are waking up to the artificiality of their society. The truth no longer matters to the system because the system is built on lies. But truth matters to the individual. The reclamation of power begins with a rejection of the materialist lie. It begins with remembering the divine spark. Consciousness as the key. If consciousness creates reality, as the ancients believed, then we are not helpless observers. We are co-creators. The elite know this. That is why they spend billions to shape our perceptions. They practice magic, the manipulation of consciousness to effect change, while telling us it doesn't exist. To fight back, we do not need weapons of war. We need to reclaim our own minds. We need to reject the fear of death that binds us to their system. We need to understand that we are eternal beings having a human experience. When a critical mass of people realizes this, when they stop consenting to the materialist illusion, the power structure collapses. Conclusion, the choice: we stand at a crossroads. One path leads to the interdimensional lizard people scenario, a metaphor for a cold, reptilian, technocratic future where humanity is reduced to a resource for a parasitic elite. This path is paved with fear, war, and the denial of the spirit. The other path is the rediscovery of our heritage. It is the realization that the kingdom of heaven is within. It is the understanding that the external world is a reflection of our internal state. If we heal ourselves, if we reconnect with the divine source, we change the timeline. The elites are playing a high-stakes game of poker, bluffing with a weak hand. Their power relies entirely on our belief in their power. They are terrified of the day we stop believing in their money, their politics, and their version of reality. The question why truth no longer matters is actually a challenge. It is a call to action. Truth doesn't matter to them because it destroys them, but it must matter to us. We must become the custodians of reality, the keepers of the flame. In the face of their artificial apocalypse, we must assert the living, breathing, eternal truth of the human spirit. Extended analysis, deeper dives into key concepts to fully flesh out this worldview. We must look closer at the specific mechanisms mentioned in the transcript and expand upon the historical and philosophical context. 1. The Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Max Weber's thesis serves as a crucial bridge in this narrative. The transition from Catholicism to Protestantism was not just theological, it was economic. The Catholic Church, for all its corruption, maintained a calendar full of feast days, days where work was forbidden. It maintained a suspicion of usury, lending money at interest. It emphasized community over the individual. Luther and Calvin smashed this. By removing the priest as the intermediary, they placed the entire burden of salvation on the individual's shoulders. This psychological pressure cooker needed a release valve. Worldly asceticism, working hard but not enjoying the fruits of that labor and debauchery, became the solution. You worked to prove you were saved, and you reinvested the profits because spending them was sinful. This accumulation of capital fueled the Industrial Revolution, but it also stripped the world of its enchantment. The woods were no longer the home of spirits, They were timber resources. The river was not a god, it was hydropower. This disenchantment paved the way for pure materialism. 2. The Sabbatean Frankist theology of transgression. This is perhaps the most controversial and esoteric aspect of the argument, but essential for understanding the hidden hand theory. Sabbatai Zevi's apostasy in 1666 shattered the normative Jewish world. Nathan of Gaza, his prophet, theologicalized this by explaining that the Messiah must descend into the Klippoth, the realm of evil, to retrieve the sparks of light held captive there. This creates a dangerous precedent, the idea that evil acts can be holy. Jacob Frank took this to its nihilistic conclusion. He rejected the Torah entirely, arguing that the good God was hidden and the God of this world who gave the laws was evil. Therefore, breaking the laws was a way to break the hold of the evil creator. When Frankists converted to Catholicism in Poland or blended into secular society in the West, they didn't just disappear, they carried this doctrine of the double life with them. Outwardly respectable, inwardly subversive. This mirrors the behavior of modern Luciferian elites who present themselves as philanthropists, saving the world while engaging in predatory practices, destroying the world. The connection between Frankism and the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, is a subject of much historical speculation, suggesting a lineage of subversive secret societies aiming to overthrow the old order of religion and monarchy to establish a new order of reason or tyranny. 3. The three pillars of agenda power. The transcript references Stephen Luke's power, a radical view. Luke argues that power is three-dimensional decision-making power. Who wins the argument? E.g., a politician passes a law. Non-decision-making power. Who sets the agenda? E.g., what issues are even discussed? Ideological power. Who shapes desires and beliefs? E.g., convincing people to want what is bad for them. The elites described in the transcript operate primarily in the third dimension. They don't just win elections, they define what democracy means. They don't just sell products, they define happiness as consumption. By controlling the worldview, specifically the materialist worldview, they prevent resistance before it can even be conceived. If you believe there is no alternative to capitalism, no alternative to the state, and no spiritual reality, you will never rebel in a meaningful way. You might argue over tax rates, Dimension 1, but you won't question the legitimacy of the currency, Dimension 3, 4, the eschatology of the elite. Why would powerful billionaires care about ancient prophecies? Because myths structure reality. Even if they are atheists, they understand the power of the narrative. However, the transcript suggests something darker, that they do believe. The alignment of Christian Zionists who want Jews in Israel to trigger the rapture, and certain Jewish factions who want to rebuild the temple, and secular neocons who want a foothold in the Middle East, creates a juggernaut of policy. They are immanentizing the eschaton, trying to bring about the end of the world through political action. This is where the interdimensional or satanic language comes in. It serves as a metaphor or a literal belief for some for an anti-human force, a force that feeds on conflict, suffering, and death. The wars in the Middle East are not just strategic blunders, they are ritual sacrifices on a global scale, feeding the engine of chaos that these groups believe will birth their new order. 5. The way out, returning to the source the counter-narrative offered, is one of spiritual remembrance. If the elite strategy is forgetfulness, forgetting our divine nature, the resistance strategy is anamnesis, unforgetting. This aligns with Platonism, Gnosticism, and Eastern philosophy. We are trapped in a cave of shadows, materialism. The journey out is not political revolution, but spiritual evolution. It requires decoupling from the fear of death, understanding consciousness as non-local and eternal. Rejection of scarcity. Materialism thrives on the idea that there isn't enough. Spiritualism recognizes the abundance of creation, building parallel systems. If the current systems are designed to enslave, we must create communities and economies based on human values rather than extraction. Summary of the argument. The problem, truth has lost its value because the dominant worldview, materialism, denies the existence of objective, transcendent meaning. The cause, this is not accidental. It is the result of a millennia-long project by elite groups to centralize power by severing the human connection to the divine. The mechanism, through the manipulation of religion, reformation, Frankism, the promotion of anxiety, and the enforcement of scientism, elites have created a prison of perception. The current context, we are in a critical phase where these covert networks, Zionists, Frankists, technocrats, are converging to trigger a global crisis, war, collapse, to finalize their control. The solution, a rejection of the materialist lie and a reclaiming of individual sovereignty through the recognition of consciousness as the fundamental reality. The war is for your mind. The weapon is fear. The shield is truth. And the victory lies in remembering who you really are.